Okay, so today we are going to be in section 7.3, and your book calls this equations with fractional coefficients. Can you see that? Is that too dark? Should I maybe go up a little bit? We'll try that. Okay, fractional coefficients, which isn't my favorite name because we know how to solve equations with fractional coefficients, right? How do you solve an equation with a fractional coefficient? Multiply by the reciprocal, right? We know that, so I don't like the title of this. These are going to be a little different. We know how to solve equations with one fraction, okay? Just like with those fractions, even if you don't quite remember, if we had an equation that had a fraction, the first thing we did is we got rid of the fraction because that's what makes those equations hard, is that there is a fraction in them, okay? Well, what do I have to get rid of in order for it not to be a fraction anymore? Well, the denominator, right? If the denominator's gone, it's no longer a fraction, okay? So the idea is the same here, but before we only had one denominator to get rid of. Today, we're going to have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 denominators that we're going to have to get rid of, okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to write down some steps. So these are going to be steps to get rid of fractions in an equation. Okay, and then once the fractions are gone, usually the equations are much, much easier, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is really similar to what we used to do. If we only had one fraction, we multiplied by the denominator, the reciprocal, or just whatever the denominator was, because that got rid of the fraction. Now, since we have multiple denominators to get rid of, I have to find a number that I can multiply every single fraction by that will get rid of all of the denominators, okay? And to do that, we are going to need to find the least common denominator, or also called the least common multiple, okay? People get this confused with factors, okay? Factors, if we're talking about factors of 6, would be 1 and 6, 2 and 3. What are multiples? What are multiples of 6? Those are factors. 6, 12, 18, 24. Things you can multiply 6 by to get you a larger number. So multiples, okay, this is what we're looking for today, okay? So we're going to look at all of our fractions and look at all the denominators. We're going to find the least common denominator, least common multiple of all of my fractions, okay? Once we find that least common denominator, we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by the least common denominator. Because when I do this, my fractions will all be gone. All those denominators will cancel out because of this least common denominator. And then once I don't have any fractions, it will turn into a really easy equation that I can solve. So solve the equation step 3. Okay, so really just kind of 3 steps today, and kind of also more good news. We're kind of doing the same thing tomorrow. It's in a different section, but the idea is the same. So if it doesn't totally sink in today, I wouldn't freak out too much because we will be spending tomorrow on this same basic idea and Monday on the same basic idea, okay? All right, so let's get into some examples. Your directions will just say to solve. Okay, so first one, I want to solve 4x over 8 minus x over 6 equals 1 over 12. Okay, now previously, we would just multiply by the denominator, right? But if I just multiply everything by 8, that's not going to get rid of this 6. That's not going to get rid of this 12. And same thing, if I try to multiply by 6 or 12, it's not going to get rid of all my denominators. So instead, we're going to find the least common denominator of these 3 numbers and multiply everything by that. So thinking about multiples, I want the least common denominator between 8, 6, and 12.
24.
24, very good. 24, okay? Once we find that least common denominator, we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by whatever that was. So we're going to multiply the left side and the right side, okay? Now if I look on this left side, Notice that I put the entire left side in parentheses. That is important because what do they tell you to do with that 24? Distribute it, right? I'm going to have to distribute that 24 to everything inside there, okay? So we're going to have to take 24 times 4x over 8, and we're going to have to take 24 times x over 6, and then on the right side, we're going to have to take 24 times 1 over 12. Okay, everything gets multiplied by that 24. And this works out really nicely because if I look here and we start simplifying each of these pieces, if I look at this 8 and 24, I can divide out that 8 and the 24 turns into a 3. My denominator's gone and I'm left with 3. 24 turns into a 3. 3 times 4x gives me 12x. And for my second term, I can divide out a 6, and that 24 turns into a 4. And 4 times x gives me a minus 4x. And then on the right-hand side, I can divide out that 12, and the 24 turns into a 2. And 2 times 1 gives me 2. Notice how all my fractions are gone? And see how easy this equation is to solve now? This is the goal. Once you get to this step, all of your fractions should be eliminated, okay? And then we just need to solve. 12x minus 4x gives me 8x. So 8x equals 2. Divide both sides by 8. And we would need to simplify your fraction. We should get x equals 1/4. Yes?
Can you please pause for a second?
All right, let's move on to number 2. Number 2, we have a minus 2 over 4 minus a over 3 equals negative 2/5. Okay, now sometimes you're going to have to work a little hard to find that least common denominator. This is one of those cases. Sometimes it's really obvious. Other times you have to do a little digging. My suggestion to you, if you have to do a little digging, pick one of your denominators and start listing out its multiples until you find a multiple that it has in common with the other two. Now out of 4, 3, and 5, the easiest one to list out the multiples is probably 5, right? So if we start listing out multiples of 5, we're looking for a multiple that it also shares with 4 and 3, okay? So if we start at 5, that doesn't work. 10 won't work. 15 won't work. 20 will work for 4 but not for 3. 25, 30 will work for 3 but not for 4. 35, 40 won't work for 3. 45, 50, 55, 60. 60. Okay, so 60 will work. That's my suggestion to you. If you have other methods that work, by all means, please do so. You can use those, but that's what I kind of do. So we're going to multiply both sides by 60. Okay, and then once again on that left side, I'm going to have to distribute that 60. Okay, now the one thing that I want you guys to look at is you notice how I'm using parentheses. This is really important because it's going to play a really important role here after I reduce. Okay, so I would recommend using those parentheses. Go ahead and multiply everything by a 60, and then we'll go back through and simplify. Okay, so for this first one, when I divide out that 4, my 60 becomes a 15. Now the reason why I told you to use parentheses is because now I have to take 15 times this quantity, which means I'm going to have to do what with the 15? Distribute it, right? So I'm going to have 15a minus 30. Okay, parentheses are a good idea. For my second term, I can divide out the 3, and the 60 turns into a 20, and I have minus 20a. And on the right-hand side, I can divide out a 5, and my 60 turns into a 12, and 12 times negative 2 gives me negative 24. Okay, and if we go through to simplify this one, simplify the left-hand side first. If I combine my a's, 15a minus 20a gives me a minus 5a minus 30 equals negative 24. Add 30 to both sides, and we have negative 5a equals 6. Divide both sides by negative 5, and we should have a equals negative 6/5. Okay, is this making sense? Yes? Really not too bad, just kind of a lot, okay? I only have 6 of these examples for you, so I'll be taking notes the entire time. Okay, number 3. X plus 1 over 3 minus x plus 2 over 4 equals 12. Okay, on that right-hand side, it should be 1/2. Now, so now what is my least common denominator? 12. It's still 12. Okay, so my least common denominator is 12. It didn't look right whenever I wrote it down. Okay, so now we're still going to multiply everything by the least common denominator. Okay, so I'm going to take 12 times x plus 1 over 3, 12 times x plus 2 over 4, and 12 times 1/2. Okay, there's one thing that I am going to have you guys pay really close attention to, and it'll be whenever we get to the second term here. But let's go ahead and start reducing. I can divide out a 3 from that first group. The 12 turns into a 4, and now I have to distribute that 4. So I have 4x plus 4. Okay, for the second term, I can divide out a 4, and that turns into a 3. So I'm going to distribute the 3, but I want you guys to notice, what kind of 3 is this? It's a -3. Okay, so you have to pay really close attention to those signs because I have to distribute a -3. So now I have a minus 3x minus 6. Okay, so the signs are going to get you, so you have to pay very close attention. Don't rush through these. And on the right-hand side, we can divide out a 2, and I just left with 6. And if I go through to start simplifying, 4x minus 3x gives me x. 4 minus 6 gives me a minus 2. Add 2 to both sides. We should get x equals 8. Okay, any questions so far? No? Okay, I'm going to have you guys try this next one on your own. Okay? I want you guys to try 2y minus y over 2 equals y over 3 minus 7. Okay, hopefully we all got y equals -6. If not, try to see where you went wrong. The least common denominator should have been 6. And once you multiply everything by 6, cancel out. All your denominators should have ended up with 12y minus 3y equals 2y minus 42. Simplify both sides, get all your variables together. Should have got -6. Okay, any questions on this one? No? Okay, yes?
When you have the 6 times the 2, why can't you divide your 2 out of that?
This is multiplication, right?
No.
So 6 times 2. Good question, good question. Any others? Okay, last two. We'll do this one together, and I'll have you try the last one on your own. Okay, they'll look a little different, but it's the same idea. So for number 5, we'll have 2/3 times y minus 1 minus 2/5 times y plus 1 equals 4. Okay, so it looks a little different, but still going to use the same idea. I'm still looking for the least common denominator. I only have 2 fractions I'm looking at. So between 3 and 5, what's my least common denominator? 15. So same idea. Multiply both sides by that 15. But this time, on this left-hand side, I do still have to distribute that 15. It looks like there's more than 2 things I have to distribute here, but it's really just 2 things because this is just a big term. It's a big multiplication problem, okay? So all I have to do is take 15 times the 2/3 times y minus 1. Okay, so that's just one term there because it's all a multiplication problem. And then I have to take the 15 times the 2/5 times y plus 1. And then, of course, on the right side, 2. 15 times that 4. Okay, does that make sense? Why you would only multiply it by those 2? Yes? Okay. And now, once again, you have to be really careful when you're reducing these ones. Okay, I can divide out a 3, and that 15 turns into a 5. Now, I'm multiplying these 2 things, right? Okay, so I'm going to take the 5 times the 2. Okay, 5 times 2 gives me 10. And then what am I going to do with that 10? Distribute it. Very good. So I have 10y minus 10. And do the same thing with that second term. I can divide out of 5. That 15 turns into a 3. And then I'm going to take that 3 times that 2. Okay, and I get 6. And I'm going to distribute that 6. But what kind of 6 is it? Very good. It's a negative 6. So I have minus 6y minus 6. And then 15 times 4 gives me 60. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, hopefully. Okay. And then if we go through and simplify 10y minus 6y gives me 4y. Minus 10 minus 6 gives me minus 16. And if we add 16 to both sides, 4y equals 76. Divide both sides by 4. Y should give you 19. Okay, questions on that one? Okay, last one. I'll have you guys try this one on your own. It'll be very similar to this one. Okay, try 1/4 times n plus 2 minus 1/6 times n minus 2 equals 3/2. Okay, the one thing I want you to be careful of is this negative sign here. Okay, remember we did the last time. All right, so go ahead and try that one on your own.